right. Thank you everyone for joining us. Good afternoon and welcome to session 2 of Upswing's webinar, How to Retain Newly Online Students During a Pandemic. I'm Aziza, I'll be hosting today, and I wanted to say right off the bat, if you have questions, please do go ahead and put those in the chat. We will be trying to answer those as we go along, and as well in the Q&A portion at the end. So I'm going to run through our agenda real quick. I'm going to go through some quick introductions of who is Upswing and who are our Upswing experts today. Then talk through some of the challenges of our students who have been forced online and give you some solutions for how to remove those barriers for the newly online students. And then finally, our last about 15 minutes will be that Q&A. Now, again, what you're going to walk away with today is 3 concrete ways to support your newly online students that you can implement at your school pretty much immediately in time for fall. And then we'll also be giving everyone here our free Upswing Online Engagement Rubric for you to be able to customize and apply to your school. Now, let's go ahead and dive in to our Upswing background. So Upswing was founded in 2013, and we've always been focused on non-traditional student retention. So that includes online adult learners, first year and first generation students, and minorities. And what we've done is provide integrated student services and online engagement consulting to colleges across the country. So this includes a wide range of things, including advising, student success coaching, tutoring, writing support, as well as our SMS-based engagement tool. And using these things, we've helped over 100 institutions extend their services online. So we're really excited to share with you some of the things that we've gathered over that time and be able to help you in your journey as well. Now to introduce our Upswing experts, we first have Melvin Hines, who is the co-founder and CEO of Upswing. Melvin grew up in South Georgia, and in his high school experience, he was one of only 68 students to graduate out of a class of 250. So this really sparked his drive and passion for supporting minorities and non-traditional students. And after getting his JD and MBA from Duke, he went on to be a first-year student success faculty member at North Carolina Central, and then later found Upswing, which is held to support student engagement and non-traditional students, again, at over 100 schools across the country. Then our second expert today is Marissa Rodriguez, and she is currently our customer experience manager at Upswing. And her experience personally as a non-traditional student and seeing the impact that higher ed could have in her own life led her to be really passionate for higher education and take her in that direction professionally. So she started out actually as a Phoenix native as an online advisor at the University of Phoenix, and then became the student engagement lead at Arizona State University. After that time, she moved into the industry sector for higher ed, and now is working with us to help support online students and other non-traditional students at Upswing. So again, this is our topic for anyone who's just joined in. We're talking about retaining newly online students during this pandemic and just trying times. And now I want to take a quick pause to just let anyone who has questions already go ahead and put those again into the chat, and that way we can make sure to get to them throughout the presentation and during the Q&A. All right, and now that should give some people a little bit of time. Now, Melvin, let's start off here. Can you tell us why we're talking through this topic today and why it's so important?
Yeah, sure. And thanks everyone for joining today. It's really great to see, number one, such a huge amount of interest in some of the data that we've been collecting. And number two, to see that, you know, a week later, we're hearing people tell us that they want to bring even more people to hear some of about this data and ways in which, you know, we're trying to help support students over the course of not just the summer, but also the upcoming academic semester with regards to all the challenges that are taking place as well. The reason why we wanted to have this conversation with you all is because of this stat, which is really a compelling stat that came out recently, showing that 3 in every 4 students who were polled said that they were unhappy with the e-learning quality during the COVID pandemic. And, I think that it's very important to disaggregate the experiences that the students kind of had in the poll about their colleges versus their online experience. Many of the students certainly recognize all the stress and strain that college administrators had to undergo in order to make sure that college could continue. But the real kind of burden for them wasn't suddenly being thrown into an experience that they weren't really ready to handle. And we're going to talk a lot about that experience in the future, but that really kind of led to this 3 in 4 students having the experience that they're talking about. And here at Upswing, part of why we wanted to put this information together is because we actually saw some of this exact same data come in over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, from where students began to kind of the shock, and then now kind of really looking back and utilizing what they've learned, looking back towards looking forward. So that's a big part of the reason why we wanted to talk about this conversation today.
Thanks. So now can we dive into where is our data going to come from today?
Yeah. So if you take a look here, this is all just taking a look at, like I said, the last 3 or 4 months. We've had over 600,000 interventions with students all across the country. I want to make sure that everyone understands that here at Upswing, we work with a very large swath of diverse colleges. So we work with 15% of all HBCUs, 5% of all HSIs. We work with quite a few community colleges, and also 4-year universities as well. And so your institution's data is likely a part of what you're seeing here as well. 600,000 interventions is what we've been able to provide to students over the course of the last few months. There were over 260,000 messages that were either sent or received from students who had our virtual assistant, which is called Anna. It's really through these conversations that a large part of the data that you're seeing today was actually created. And so you'll see a lot more about how students responded to Anna during some of the messages that we sent out, as well as the messages that students were sending when they were just unsure of what's going to happen next. We also, during this time period, communicated with over 54,000 students. That's, it's a pretty wide swath of the population. Part of what we wanted to make sure that we were doing in this presentation here is capturing the sentiment over the course of time of all the different types of students that were coming in, and that's what we saw here as well. And we also received these messages from over 60 different colleges. And so once again, you should be able to see the data from a school pretty similar to yours in some of the information that we're going to show moving forward.
Thanks. So now, Marissa, can you tell us a bit about who the students are who are creating this data?
Sure. So really what this data shows are the types of students that we support here at Upswing. We put a lot of focus on helping underserved non-traditional student populations across all of our schools. So that's why you'll see 50% of our students, their household is under 30K. We're helping more than 45% of African American and Hispanic students. 43% of our students are working while in college, 37% are adult learners, and 27% are online students, even prior to COVID-19. So it's really important for us to acknowledge that we want to create and build tools and services for students that are non-traditional, but not only that, we also make sure to hire diverse people here at Upswing so that we can have people here who understand the backgrounds and some of the obstacles that these students experience while we are building these things out.
Absolutely. So now, Marissa, can you tell us about some of these inflection points and where is that coming from?
Sure. So we use an analytics platform that compiles all of our data and usage from the different products. So essentially what this data showing is all the unique ANA messages from all of our schools throughout the course of this past semester during COVID-19, starting at the very beginning of the semester till the end of it. So as you can see, the beginning of the semester, it was pretty, low amounts of communication. Students are just kind of getting back into school. They're just getting adjusted. But then it's very clear where there was the immediate disruption when COVID-19 crept in around February, end of February, and that this was where we started to see some immediate reactions based on our ANA conversation. So we identified these inflection periods as 5 different stages where students experience not only shown here in this data, but also through the conversations that we were seeing come through in the conversations with students. So students were opening up and asking questions based on these different themes. And then the messages that you'll see on this presentation are actual messages that students sent us. So you'll get to kind of see how they sounded and what they were saying. Since ANA is half automated, half human supported, our team could really feel the influx of the student support during these periods. So it was after the semester winded down that I was able to dive into our ANA engagement data and discovered that we had over a 342% increase in the number of unique student messages sent during this time compared to a typical student experience.
Wow, thanks. So now, Melvin, can you walk us through what the challenges were that students were experiencing over this time period?
Yeah, sure. And this is going to, for all of you all who were still digesting the previous slide, these stages here are really a big part of where we're going to go with the conversation today. We want to actually unpack each one of those different stages that we saw over the course of the last 3 months, so that you all can become a lot more familiar about what this might look like in the fall semester and spring semester. We're going to start with that immediate disruption that we were talking about. Students who were hearing all the fast-paced information as it was coming through. Then we'll move towards the adjustment to a new normal, which is essentially having to be a student while also having to accomplish and tackle various challenges like working from home, etc. Then we'll go through some of the messages and responses that we were tackling around accessing different types of resources, new resources for a lot of people that were for their first time having to kind of deal with being an online student, if you will. Finally, as the dust started to settle a little bit more, a lot of the questions that we received were around mental health, around the impacts that was having on their day-to-day lives and the isolation's impact as well. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And then finally, what we've been really seeing most recently is students expressing a bit of an uncertainty about whether or not they are the right student to continue moving forward in the fall semester, and some of the things that we've really been trying to do to help them gain the confidence that they need to continue to be an academic student amidst so much change and uncertainty.
Gotcha. So let's start with this first stage here. What were the situations that students were in at the start of this pandemic?
Yeah, so let's kind of rewind the clock a little bit back to those initial weeks when all of a sudden, we were faced with this unknown variable that didn't really have a lot of information out, called the coronavirus. A lot of people were trying to understand what this would mean for themselves, as well as their families. And one of the crazy things was that a lot of this took place right around the time of spring break. So you had students that were getting ready to take midterm exams, thinking about what they were going to do during their break. And then suddenly, kind of towards the end of the break, they weren't sure if they would ever be coming back to campus. And I'm sure a lot of the administrators here remember that and recall that experience as well. To really kind of double click on what the experience was like for the students, what we saw was that um, some of the big things that were impacting them were, one, this sudden change in environment, where suddenly students were trying to figure out what their college experience was going to look like moving forward. And as they went to find that information out and access that information, they began to find difficulty in understanding which piece and type of information was the actual accurate version. They would receive one type of information from, for example, a professor or a resident advisor, a second piece of information from an email, and a completely third piece from a website. And so a large part of the information that was changing was also changing quickly at the same time. And then what we also noticed from a lot of students was that not only was their student journey being impacted, but their work environment was being impacted. So, you know, a large part of people had started college with the understanding that they would be able to work their way through. And as you saw in the earlier stats, that is a pretty significant portion of the students who use Upswing. Suddenly, with everything shutting down, that was income that they couldn't count on any longer. And so there was a lot of just, I think, frustration, as well as kind of shock, deer in headlights, if you will, from some of the messages and responses that we saw coming through. And that was what we here at Upswing had to kind of work on in those initial days to really try and help students navigate.
Absolutely. So Marissa, can you tell us about what the students were telling us at that point?
Well, I think a lot of it was just a lot of questions, but what made it a little bit difficult on our end was that we didn't quite have all of the information because the schools didn't have the information. So there was just kind of a little bit of some chaos there to try to find out where and how to do things. So one school in particular, one of our HBCUs in Florida, they had requested their students to basically move out in almost 3 hours to pack up their life from their dorm and move everything. So imagine having to pack up everything in a room and everyone's packing everything all at the same time. I can't even imagine the chaos that was in there just to try to get everybody out. So I think really it was just a lot of uncertainty and not knowing how to move forward exactly on all of our ends.
Absolutely. So now, what was the student experience as they were trying to adjust to this new normal then?
Yeah, so, you know, it really began with the sudden realization that the rest of college life, at least for the spring semester, was going to take place in the same place that their children were going to be, that their spouses were going to be, that other members of their family were going to be as well. And this became difficult in a lot of experiences that we were communicating with students about. For example, people were, you know, having to kind of battle each other for quiet spaces within the house. They were also having to battle each other for access to wireless internet. And by the way, this is all assuming that they had access to these resources. There were a lot of people that didn't already immediately have that access because it just, you know, being an on-campus student, that wasn't something that was necessary for them. And suddenly they were kind of dealing with trying to figure out how to adjust to this new experience. And so large part of the questions, a large part of the concerns were with students who were trying to pick back up with a class that they finished just prior to spring break and weren't sure how to access those classes. And we were really kind of trying to help them navigate those troubled waters.
Yeah. So then, Marissa, can you tell us, does this actually mirror what we see for non-traditional students typically, or is this something different?
Well, I think this message here shows an added layer of obstacles that non-traditional students experience. on top of transitioning into a fully online environment. So non-traditional students have other obligations. Most likely there's more obstacles than your average student. If they are first gen, they might not be in a household where there's family doesn't quite know how to support somebody who's going to school in a higher educational space. If they have kids, suddenly kids become the first priority and schoolwork becomes less of the priorities. So we just saw a variety of completely discouraged student messages that came through from our student base after sending the sentiment analysis shown here that went out to several of our schools. And since our focus at Upswing is to really support non-traditional students, we understand when we add this layer of human support, how much it's needed to really be empathetic and encouraging to these students.
Absolutely. So now can we talk through what were the resource challenges that students were seeing now that they're doing school from home?
This was another added layer of difficulty. I think that given the short amount of time that a lot of colleges had to work with to bring students online, the idea was that, okay, we can just sort of take a lot of the courses that we were currently doing and maybe perhaps put them on Zoom and continue where we left off. Well, what I think we started seeing from a lot of students, not just through Anna, but through our help support from the coaches that were working with them, was that there were so many students that were struggling to even get started, let alone actually complete in a wholly new environment. I'm sure many of the administrators who are here as well probably heard some of those same complaints and concerns. One of our coaches, for example, was reaching out to a student who signed up to take a tutoring course specific to web development. And when the session took place, they actually weren't, the student actually didn't have a question at all about web development. The question was, I have an assignment that's due, and I can't figure out how to upload it to Blackboard. These were just the even most basic of needs that students were having. And a big part of that trouble was the fact that, their support networks that they usually had, whether they were students that they could talk to while in class or professors that they could visit, suddenly weren't as available. And that really started to add an additional layer of stress as well.
So, Marissa, can you tell us then, is this comparable with what online students typically deal with, or again, heightened to another level?
I don't think so, just because what made this different was students typically could rely on on-campus resources. And then if they were an online student, they would be preparing to have the resources that they needed in order to facilitate them taking their classes. But since we had to transition so quickly, there wasn't that time to kind of prepare for all of this that was happening. And so then that's why we ran into kind of like these walls where students, didn't have laptops at home. They didn't have Wi-Fi at home because they weren't prepared for that. And they normally could have relied on their school to provide that instead. So one of our Hispanic serving institutions here in Texas, several students expressed to us this concern that they specifically didn't have computers, and were asking for advice on what they could do because they didn't know what to do. So what we did was we worked with one of our school admins to let them know we saw multiple messages coming through from our students that were expressing this. And so what they decided to do was to create a survey that we then sent out through Anna that would allow them to know which students were in that situation, so that they could then work with them to provide them that resource, and students continue to be able to work through their classes.
Absolutely, that's great. So now let's talk about mental health. How was students' mental health impacted during all of this?
Yeah, so now we've kind of walked through a pathway, right? So we talked about what happened in those first few days, and then in the first couple of weeks. So at this point in time, what we started seeing was the dust start to settle a little bit. People starting to get a little bit into a groove of how do I access courses? What is my, you know, day-to-day life going to look like, and how do I find and share quiet spaces with other family members? After that, that's when we really started seeing this start to seep through. People who were struggling with sudden isolation, struggling with the fear of not knowing what the pandemic means for their family, for their future, um, for everything they've invested so far, for their financial abilities. And this was, you know, this was certainly pretty heartbreaking hearing and seeing some of the messages that were coming through about this. I think that this was one of the places where we felt that it was really important to continue to reach out to students and continue to let them know that there's a support mechanism that's here, because a lot of them suddenly felt very, very much alone, without having to, you know, have that ability to connect with anyone else really. And that's where I think over the course of, you know, probably the last, say, month or so, we've really been trying to help support students and help them navigate these waters that they've been in lately.
Gotcha. So Marissa, how has this mental health impact been reflected on the student engagement side?
So it depends. If we are on the right track, student engagement increases because we're getting students to open up and to talk to us about it. Now, on the flip side, if you aren't able to connect with students, this could potentially be really bad mental state that might prompt them to want to drop out because they have no outlet to be able to talk about those things or feel supported in multiple ways. So we made sure to be proactive about this and address this topic. And this is where we really started to see an influx of messages occur. So now some of it was prompted by the types of messages that we curated through our engagement strategy, where we focused on overly supporting students during this time. But it shows why we saw an increase of unique student responses by 376% from the previous year. So we really use Anna to create a support system and really become a virtual friend for students, which breaks down that barrier for them to be able to open up and to really start talking about these things, which then allows us to be able to support them by providing them the resources that's going to allow them to continue to kind of talk through that with a professional. I think that that's kind of the key thing, is really just to open up those lines of communication.
Gotcha. Thanks. So now that we've been through this whole journey with what the students have been going through, Melvin, can you tell us what students were considering and why they were just so uncertain?
Sure. So, you know, this is where we are today, right? Students are at an inflection point, and they've been through a lot. They've seen a lot. They've had to balance a lot at the same time, and now they're really thinking about themselves. Do I really and truly believe that I have what it takes to continue becoming a student in the fall semester? And I think that this is a big part of what we're seeing when we're noticing the changes and potential enrollment for that fall semester, is students just not really feeling confident that they're going to be able to do well. And, you know, they're wanting to say, you know, I think I'm just better at an in-person experience than an online experience. Um, I think that there are certainly some things that we can do to help change that around and turn that around for students. And, you know, it really is about us focusing on certain key pieces over the course of that fall semester to really make those changes happen. But, you know, as of right now, students are thinking that it makes a little bit more sense to hit pause as opposed to trying to continue to trudge forward. And as we all know, when students do decide that they want to pause, a lot of times they don't return. And so a big part of what we want to do is make sure that those students are getting exactly what they need to better not just their lives, but the lives of their families as well.
Yeah. So Marissa, can you tell us about a specific example of a student who was kind of struggling with this uncertainty and what happened?
Sure. So one of our favorite moments that occurred during this time was with one particular student at another Texas college of ours. So this particular student hadn't begun to interact with Anna with any previous messages that had been sent out. This example shown here was the first time that this student actually started. And that's also one thing too that we see with students is sometimes they'll continue to receive these messages, and it's not until something really sparks their attention that they start to kind of engage, and then it just starts rolling from there. So this one again was unrelated. We send out a message about financial aid, and then she lets us know she's wanting to drop out. So in this particular instance, what we did was we started to ask questions and find out, what's going on? Why are you feeling that you need to withdraw? And essentially we got her to open up and tell us that she had lost her job. She had gotten into a car accident. She had 3 kids that she was trying to teach, and she was falling behind in her schoolwork. So we immediately started referring her to resources to help her troubleshoot all the different obstacles that she was experiencing. And then we reached out to the school admin to let them know, what the student was going through, and so that we could also kind of connect those dots. So the school admin got the student connected to all the right resources, and by the end of the semester, she reached back out to Anna to let us know that she only had to drop 1 class. She was able to get 2 100s and 198% in her final exams. So she just expressed how the support from Anna was really heaven sent, and it helped prevent her from dropping out just because of those specific interventions. So it's these types of interactions that make us also passionate at Upswing to continue to help support students through to graduation.
Wow, that's awesome. So now that we've kind of talked through the challenges, let's pivot and talk through what can we actually do to support students on the different campuses. So Melvin, I know you just recently wrote a blog post about this. How can schools try and adjust to this new normal and shift their services?
Yeah, for sure. So, everyone can actually access this blog post as well. It's on our Upswing Medium blog. So if you just go to medium.com/@upswing, you'll be able to see this latest blog post. But basically, what we have learned over the course of time is that, oh, thanks for sharing, Aziza. What we've been able to show over the course of time is that the typical hours that are available for students, say, the 10 to 4, Monday through Thursday, really doesn't support all the different types of demand and hours of demand that students are coming in to get help. What we've really noticed is that it particularly impacts non-traditional students who are more likely to come in during the weekends, who are more likely to come in afternoons and evenings. And as a result, only 32% of the entire demand that a student is needing over the course of a 7-day period is actually represented in the typical hours that are available for typical colleges. So when you go to my blog, you'll actually see this image that you see down here. It'll be much bigger than what's here because every block actually represents a single hour out of an entire week. And what we've done is leverage all the data that we've had over the course of the last few years to highlight what percentage of any given week's demand shows up in that one particular hour. The darker that they get, the more demand that you're going to see there. And so you can actually play around with it yourself and see, if your hours of operations actually align well with your students. And if not, really kind of have these internal conversations to talk about how you might be able to flex some of these hours to capture a much greater percentage than that 32% that we're seeing here. like I mentioned, if we can really focus on creating more weekend coverage and pushing more towards the evening rather than the morning, we can really start to help support more students without having to increase the budgets, because obviously budget constraints are one of the big reasons why schools aren't able to, to support 100% of the hours that are available. So take a look at that blog, see how that might be able to help you and your school support your students.
Thanks. So now let's talk about faculty. Marissa, what can we do to support our faculty in online engagement, and why are they so important in this work?
So in my experience working as an academic advisor, as well as seeing how the online models worked with the schools that we do partner with, many times faculty members are your first line of student support in receiving and sharing information. They're answering questions, they're possibly sharing resources, so they are key to an online environment. So we really recommend thinking of your faculty as an ally with your online student engagement. With Anna, we were able to see en masse the number of messages that came through where students communicated they were unable to get in touch with their instructors or needed clarifications to questions that only the instructors could answer. So these are student obstacles that can easily be solved for with strong faculty communication. And we encourage you to really work with faculty to bridge that communication barrier and create stronger student relationships in a virtual environment. So by helping instructors to see how they play into this engagement strategy, encourage them to over communicate, especially during a time like this, it's going to be really well worth the effort and greatly impact the students' willingness to persist. So then with this positive student-faculty rapport, you can continue to build upon those relationships so that there's more of them who show up and want to engage in the virtual classroom and in the online environment. So we've seen value in providing faculty resources of all kinds to support students in an online environment. This could translate to ensuring they are aware of resources like tutoring, essay review services, anything that's going to help the students' academic success. You can also help them to identify tools or video capabilities that they can use in their classroom to build upon their online instruction, and even provide them data so that they understand how their work impacts student trends. So here at Upswing, we work closely with our admins to provide faculty information to promote services that will positively impact their student success. As faculty are interacting with students, are you aware of the concerns that students are bringing to their attention so that your team can help address those concerns and try to find a solution? Has your team created a feedback loop with your faculty departments to support one another? This might mean having a direct faculty lead who you and your team meet with regularly to share that information with back and forth and express concerns or roadblocks preventing faculty and students from progressing. So one situation which happened very recently at another Texas college of ours was a student who reached out to us to express that she couldn't access her final exam, and she was really upset about it, didn't know what to do. So we reached out to the admin that we work with. She got in contact with their tech team to figure out that there was a glitch with the final exam. And so they also then got in contact with the faculty member to let them know about this. And so they were able to fix this and make sure that the entire class had access to this final exam. And so essentially an entire class was almost saved because we all worked together to make sure that the students had the environment they needed in order to be successful.
Awesome. So now that we know how important faculty is as one of the communication layers, how can we leverage across communication layers to help students in this time?
So one area we saw schools stood out from others was with their communication plans. We know everyone had to adjust with all your already scheduled semester communications, but being laser focused on providing resourceful, timely, and most importantly, empathetic communications, I think was what made the difference. So first and foremost, you have to ensure that you're providing a single source of truth across all of your communication channels to bring specific attention and information to students. So you want to meet students at the channels that they're going to. So thinking about using it through social, website, text message. If students don't have multiple places to look for information, they might easily get stuck on something that could easily be prevented from moving forward, just with knowing where to find it. And in transitioning to a fully online environment for your communication plan, it's really important to have that two-way communication. So with students online, they just can't come into the office to ask staff questions anymore. They need to have a place where they can ask questions, get the answer, and continue to have an open dialogue to continue to move those conversations forward. By having a two-way communication loop also allows staff to really understand what are the major trends that are happening with this questions that students are asking, so that you can kind of approach it from a layer of adding more services or adding different services or adjusting your services to accommodate to those needs. So also thinking about, do your communications provide insight to your students' mental health? We all know how much retention is or isn't related to academic issues, but centered around their mental state. So how are you all coping during an already stressful period of their life are some really great questions to be able to ask your students. Students won't easily disclose this information, but what solution does your school have in order to bring up these types of conversations with your students? And I think really the key here is to at least find a way to surface some of those thoughts through a trusted source so that you can refer them to the resources where a professional can address those concerns. So over the course of the pandemic, we've done a couple of tactics to address mental health by bringing attention Stress Awareness Month, which happens in April, asking open-ended questions about how students are adjusting to change, and ensuring that they know their school's process for finding a counselor. So this prompts them to talk through these issues and reach out to any of the resources that are going to help them get to a better mental state.
Awesome. So now that brings us to our last point here about online student engagement and assessing that at your respective schools. Melvin, can you talk us through this rubric, please?
Yeah, so the main purpose of what we wanted to share with you all with regards to this rubric was to really help you to think about how you're understanding the specific challenges that your students are facing. You know, we kind of take a look at all the different types of challenges that are going out there, and really try and get a strong understanding of what are we hearing over and over again. Whether, for example, like Marissa mentioned, it's an issue with laptops and accessibility as a result, or whether it's an issue with mental health. What we're really trying to help you all do with the student engagement rubric, which we do with each one of the colleges that we partner with, is to help understand what are some of those main challenges. Then once we know what those main challenges are, then it's an idea around surveying the students to find out which of those main challenges are happening most frequently, and which of those main challenges are huge barriers for the students to be able to continue doing what they're needing to do throughout their student journey. Those that have the combination of both of those factors should be at the top of your list. Because the idea is that in a given academic year, you're not going to be able to solve every one of these challenges. What you want to do is prioritize the top 4 to 5 of those challenges, and say, these are the things we're going to tackle this year. And next year, you can kind of go back and take a look at other challenges that you want to tackle as well. But really, you want to focus on which ones can we do today to really help level that playing field for online students over the course of the next 6 to 9 months. Once you're able to understand which challenges you want to focus on, then the last piece that we really want to see happen is a proactive plan of thinking about if a student says that this challenge in particular is one that we're struggling with, what is going to be the action step that we can take? Because it's not necessarily enough to just identify what those challenges are and identify what those milestones are for achieving those challenges, but we also need to know who all will be involved in supporting those students and making sure that they are successful and continuing along their student journey. So on this next slide here, you can see how we do this here at Upswing. So this is a list of what those challenges look like, of all the different types of messages that come in. Some of them are around financial stressors. Some of them are personal setbacks. Some of them are around specific academics. I think that one of the things that's key to kind of pull out of here is that only 29% of those questions that come out are actually specific to academics. What we have to do then as an organization is understand when each one of the students are coming in with one of these pings, how are we going to connect them in with the right resource at the right time? Because when a student is struggling right now, they're looking for help right now. They don't, the survey and then kind of disappearing doesn't really benefit them too much, and sometimes can even make them feel even more alone. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about how we're supporting them along each one of these pathways. And so here's just a high-level example of how we've been able to do that within each one of these buckets that we have here. So moving forward, what we want to do is create this exact same experience for you all as well. So this is a rubric that we've set up for you. You can take this and really kind of run with it. What you're going to be able to do with this rubric is first identify it, like we were talking about before. What are the top issues that your students are saying are their big struggles right now as online students, especially for a lot of institutions that are still contemplating not coming back to school 100% next year? Let's understand what are the biggest issues that the students are having. Is it Wi-Fi? Is it isolation and mental health? Is it access to laptops? Is it something else altogether? Is it financial aid related? What we need to do is find out what are some of those top issues. Then what are the frequency with which your students are encountering these issues? And how much of a barrier is it every time they encounter that issue? Once you do that, you can prioritize them into these top 4 buckets here. If you want to add a 5th one, you can add a 5th one as well, but we really like to kind of keep it to the top 4. And then from there, the idea is, what are we as an institution going to do to make sure that we can support them along that pathway so that when they encounter that, we can help them resolve that also very quickly.
Absolutely. Marissa, anything to add here about how Upswing can help walk us through that process?
Yeah, I think what helps is that because we do this with multiple schools, it makes it a little bit easier to really sift through maybe some ideas for those challenges and then provide that level of expertise to kind of know how to really gather that information from those particular admins so that we can really focus on what's key for that school. So this is essentially how we like to think about using this rubric. And we hope that it's helpful for you to think about essentially a two-way communication loop. That's kind of like what this would be used for and how we think about the strategy for doing something like that. And it can be something that you then take to your school and then apply it to some of those main challenges and to kind of really streamline where you can connect resources to student communications.
Gotcha, thanks. So now for our final announcement here, Melvin, can you tell us a little bit more about how we can help schools who aren't maybe even partnered with Upswing at this point?
Yeah, so a big part of what we've heard over the course of just the last few weeks, really, and months, is schools who have decided that they want to take on an initiative to increase their student engagement through whichever tools that they've been utilizing. Maybe they've decided that that they have picked the tools that they want to utilize in order to better support their students in an online environment. But the issue still is that the engagement that they want to see isn't quite there yet. A big part of what people have asked us is, what are the tips that you have? What are the things that you've seen that have worked well? What are the suggestions that you have for us? Can you come in and even show us some of the things that you all do to identify pathways moving forward? And so what we've wanted to do, especially now, especially kind of taking a look at the fact that so many colleges are thinking about the fall semester and how can they, better that online engagement experience from that 75% number that we were talking about earlier, is we wanted to show and walk people through some of the steps that we take to help support students. Here are just kind of a couple of examples here in terms of how we market to students. But what we also look at is, how do we learn from students as well, so that we can put each student on an individual pathway towards their student success. If we can do that well, then together we can really help to increase student achievement. And so that's a big part of what we're wanting to do moving forward, is take some of the more consultative aspects of what we do here as an organization and make it available to everyone, so that you all can get that same type of support, and think about it in that same type of way. So if this is something that you do want to learn a little bit more about, feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to share that information with you.
Thanks, that's really exciting. So now we've come to the end of this presentation. So thank you to Melvin and Marissa for walking us through this journey here, and for everyone who has participated live with us. We really appreciate you being here, and hope that you were able to take some learnings away from this. Now we're going to go ahead and move into our Q&A section. So if you have not got a chance to do that yet, please ask your questions in the chat. We want to get to as many as possible. And again, we will be sending out the recording of this and the engagement rubric for your use as well. So just keep that in the back of your mind if you'd like to share that. Now let's look into the questions. One of the first questions I see is about strategy. Do we have differentiated strategies for how we can leverage faculty versus administrators?
I'll go ahead and take that one. Yes, we absolutely have different strategies. And then I would also even say for how we market across the entire school. So each one of those, really they're a channel. Each one of those channels, we think about it in a completely different way, and provide resources specific to the different audience. So we might have a completely different conversation with admins in how we want to promote services versus how we want to support faculty and how they can promote services to their students. How that specifically might get played out is, maybe we might provide emails and flyers and promotional materials to admins that they can use across their school and across different communications. And then with faculty, we might provide them language that they can include in their syllabus. We might provide them videos that they can include in their LMS. So we definitely are thinking differently on how we would promote to students across different staff and support across school.
Thanks, Marissa. So it looks like we have another couple of ones following on, more specific to our platform. So the first one is in regard to how schools are using the platform, and someone would like to know, do we use screen sharing for these different functions that are supporting students online? I feel like that's go ahead, Melvin, sorry.
Oh yeah, so I can hop in on there. We definitely use screen sharing on our platform. We actually utilize our own proprietary video conferencing solution that we built in-house. So kind of similar to what you would see here in a Zoom setting, we would have all the capabilities such as audio, video, chat. There's a whiteboard that's available as well, and then screen sharing is one of our more popular features. Everything is by default, so and nothing to have to download. And so the benefit of that is that even if you're using an iPad or some other type of tablet, you can still take advantage as a student in that experience, or as as an administrator in that experience as well.
Awesome. So another question we have is in regarding to communication between Upswing tutors and faculty. Can you differentiate between how Upswing tutors may interact with a school versus the Upswing heroes and consultants?
Yeah, so a big part of what and I hear you're talking about Upswing tutors, so we'll specifically talk about that as opposed to college tutors. But with Upswing tutors, at the end of each session, what we do is require our tutors to provide feedback on each one of the interactions. So earlier we said that there were over 600,000 interventions that took place between the beginning of March and now. A large portion of those interventions were actually through our Upswing tutors and coaches. What happened post those interventions was our coaches were required to provide feedback on the actual session that took place, the student that they were working with, some of the key insights that they were learning, and what's that student's sort of likelihood of understanding at the end of that session. That information is information that is actually tied together in our admin dashboard. And a lot of our institutions share that with department heads, share that with faculty members. One institution in particular, every single quarter, will share that information with the math department, science department, writing department, so that they know which students they see to be potentially at risk as well. But it could be shared a lot more frequently than that as well. So a big part of what we're trying to do is make sure that this information is being communicated as frequently as possible, and as real time as possible as well, so that everyone can be on the same page, because it really does take a village, especially as we're moving into this online environment where every student is now technically a non-traditional student.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so we have a few more and we're getting close to time, but I'm going to try and get in as many as possible. So this one looks like it's more for Marissa. How often, following on to communication again, are we discussing issues that we hear from Anna with administrators? And can you talk through really quickly what the process is like when we do hear issues come up from students?
I think we do definitely wait until we've started to see more of a trend with something. We do our best to try to navigate the conversation and provide as much resource that we can to the student before we escalate that. And then at that point is when we might bring that attention to an admin. The other thing that we would definitely reach out to an admin is when we have students who are directly saying that they want to drop out. That one we do make sure to escalate on top of continuing the conversation to kind of dive a little bit deeper into what's motivating them to want to go that path.
Thank you. Okay, now we have a technical one. How does Upswing integrate into the learning management systems or sit within those? And what integrations are possible?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we can talk sort of the technicalities of it all day long. I think that just as a high level piece of information here, we do work to make it so that every student from their LMS can automatically jump into either an Upswing session or connect with a school coach or tutor as well. Typically what we're doing is integrating within the SIS system, so that even as it's inside the LMS, if they're already logged in, they to say a Blackboard or a Canvas or Moodle Rooms, they will automatically see Upswing's information in that LMS and can also just click the link to automatically be taken into their profile as well. As far as the different types of integrations that we do, we've worked with several schools to implement integrations for several different types of specific tools like Starfish, Salesforce, and others. What we would do is talk with the institution to find out what's important to them. And then our tech team really kind of tries to work to make sure that we can make those integrations take place. So that's kind of a high level information. We could definitely get a whole lot, a whole lot deeper about that offline though.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so we're right at 1:31, so it's about time. But thank you everyone for participating in this live Q&A, and again to our Upswing experts for answering so many of our audience's questions. If you didn't get a chance to ask a question that's still on your mind, please do still reach out to us, and we'd be happy to answer that for you and get you more clarity or context. My email is here on the screen. You can contact Aziza at upswing.io, and I'll get you pointed in the right direction there. Now, this does conclude the end of our webinar, so thank you so much for joining us, and now we're going to go ahead and sign off.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.